Admiral Vexthera stood in the command center of her massive warship, staring at the holographic map that showed the current state of the galaxy. Red zones marked the areas where entire star systems had vanished. Each red dot represented billions of lives lost, entire civilizations wiped out in mere hours. The map was becoming more red than blue with each passing day. Admiral, her tactical officer, called out, his voice shaking. "We just received the final transmission from the 7th Fleet there. They're gone, ma'am. Admiral Kethmer's entire force has been destroyed." Vexthera's forearms hung limply at her sides. The 7th Fleet had been their strongest military force, equipped with the most advanced weapons the Coalition had ever created. If they couldn't stop the Devourers, what could? "How long did they last?" she asked quietly. 17 minutes after first contact, came the reply. 17 minutes. The most powerful fleet in galactic history had lasted 17 minutes against the ancient enemy that had awakened from the dark spaces between stars. The Devourers were unlike anything they had faced before. They weren't driven by conquest, or territory, or resources in the way other species understood them. They simply consumed everything in their path, turning matter and energy into more of themselves. The bridge fell silent, except for the soft hum of the ship's engines. Around her, the crew worked at their stations, but she could see the fear in their eyes. They all knew what this meant. The Coalition had thrown everything they had at the Devourers, and it hadn't been enough. "Ma'am," another officer spoke up hesitantly, "the High Council is requesting an immediate conference call." Vexthera nodded and activated the communication system. The holographic images of the Coalition's remaining leaders appeared around her. She recognized most of them, though several familiar faces were missing. The Arcturus Council representative was gone, along with the entire Rigel delegation. So many voices would never be heard again. Admiral spoke Council Leader Zethera, her usually calm voice tight with stress. "We need options. The Devourers will reach the core worlds within days. Our fleets are gone. Our defenses have failed. What do? We have one option left," Vexthera said slowly. "The humans." The reaction was immediate. Several council members began speaking at once, their voices overlapping in protest. "The humans are primitive. They've been quarantined for good reason. Their technology is centuries behind ours. Too violent, too unpredictable." Council Leader Zethera raised her hand for silence. "Admiral, explain your reasoning." Vexthera took a deep breath. "The Devourers have defeated every coalition fleet using the same basic strategy. They analyze our tactics, predict our movements, and counter everything we do. They're incredibly efficient because they think logically just like we do, and the humans don't think logically," asked another council member. "No, they don't," Vexthera replied. "That's exactly why we quarantined them 300 years ago. Human military history is full of impossible victories, battles won through chaos and unpredictability. They use strategies that make no sense until they suddenly work." She activated another holographic display, showing historical human conflicts. "Look at their wars. They've won battles by pretending to retreat, by attacking in winter storms, by using weapons in ways they were never designed for. They adapt faster than any species we've encountered. But their technology, ... dub, quotes one council member protested. "It's primitive, yes," Vexthera agreed. "But the Devourers aren't just defeating us with superior technology. They're defeating us because they can predict everything we do. Humans are unpredictable." Council Leader Zethera was quiet for a long moment. The quarantine was put in place because human aggression was deemed a threat to galactic peace. Their tendency toward violence, their chaotic thinking patterns, their willingness to sacrifice themselves for others. "We considered these dangerous traits, dangerous to peace," Vexthera said. "But maybe exactly what we need for war." Debate continued for several minutes, but everyone knew they were running out of time. The Devourers moved faster than any coalition ship, consuming everything in their path. Traditional diplomacy and careful planning were luxuries they could no longer afford. "Very well, Council Leader Zethera finally said, Admiral Vexthera. "You are authorized to make contact with Earth. But remember, They've been isolated for 3 centuries. They may not even remember that other species exist. They remember, Vexthera said quietly. Our monitoring stations have been tracking their communications. They know about us, and they know about the quarantine. They're probably not going to be very happy to see us. Then you'd better hope their curiosity is stronger than their anger, another council member said. Vexthera nodded to her crew. Set course for the Sol system. Maximum speed. As her ship turned toward the small, unremarkable star system where humanity lived, she wondered if they were making the right choice. The humans had been quarantined because their nature was considered too dangerous for civilized space. Now that same dangerous nature might be the only thing that could save them all. The irony wasn't lost on her. After 3 centuries of keeping humanity isolated to protect the galaxy, they were now rushing to ask for their help to save it. Dr. Ji-Woo Kim had been working late in her laboratory when the emergency alarms began blaring throughout the International Space Station. She rushed to the observation deck, her heart pounding as she saw something that shouldn't have been possible. A massive alien spacecraft hung in space near Earth, its hull scarred and damaged, with strange lights flickering across its surface. Dr. Kim, please report to the communication center immediately, came the urgent voice over the intercom. As Earth's lead expert on possible alien life, she had always known this day might come, but she never expected it to happen like this. The ship was enormous, easily 10 times larger than anything humans had ever built. Even from a distance, she could see the damage. Huge sections of the hull had been torn away and patched with what looked like emergency repairs. Parts of the ship were completely dark, as if entire sections had lost power. Whatever had happened to this vessel, it had been through a terrible battle. General Hyensu Park was already in the communication center when she arrived, his face grim as he studied the data flowing across multiple screens. We've been receiving the same message for the past hour, he told her. The translation software is working, but I wanted you here before we respond. Guwu nodded and took her position at the console. She had spent years developing protocols for exactly this situation, though she had always imagined first contact would be more peaceful. The message was simple but desperate. Please respond. We need to talk. We need your help. Open the channel, she said quietly. The main screen flickered to life, and Ji-Woo found herself face to face with an alien being. The creature was tall and elegant, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer slightly under the ship's lights. But what struck her most were the 4 arms that moved with fluid grace, and the obvious exhaustion in the alien's large dark eyes. I am Admiral Vexthera of the Galactic Coalition, the alien said, her voice coming through the translation system with surprising clarity. I know this contact violates the quarantine protocols that have been in place for your world, but we have no choice. My people, ... all our people, are dying. We need your help. General Park leaned forward, his expression skeptical. You're telling us that there's a galactic civilization out there and you've kept us isolated from it? For 300 years? Vexthera confirmed. Your species was deemed too dangerous for contact with other civilizations. Your tendency toward violence, your unpredictable nature, your willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. These traits were considered threats to galactic peace. And now you want our help? Ju asked, trying to keep her voice calm despite the incredible situation. An ancient enemy has awakened, Vexthera explained, her 4 arms gesturing to displays that showed star maps with large red areas. We call them the Devourers. They consume everything in their path, turning matter and energy into more of themselves. In 3 weeks, they have destroyed every major coalition fleet. Dozens of advanced civilizations have been wiped out. General. Park studied the star maps with a military expert's eye. Your technology is obviously far beyond ours. Your ships are bigger, your weapons more advanced. If you can't stop them, what makes you think we can? Because you think differently than we do, Vexthera said simply. The Devourers are incredibly efficient. They analyze our tactics, predict our movements, and counter everything we try. They defeat us because they think logically, and so do we. But humans don't think logically, Gu asked. Your military history is full of impossible victories, Vexthera replied. Battles won through chaos, unpredictability, and strategies that make no sense until they suddenly work. You adapt faster than any species we've encountered. What we saw as dangerous chaos, you might call creative problem solving. The communication center fell silent as the implications sank in. They were being told that humanity had been isolated from a galactic community for centuries because they were considered too violent and unpredictable. Now, those same traits might be the only thing that could save that community. Tell us more about these devourers, Jiwoo said finally. What exactly are we dealing with? Vexthera's expression grew even more grim. They appeared to be an ancient machine intelligence, possibly millions of years old. They don't negotiate, they don't communicate, they simply consume. They convert planets, stars, entire solar systems into raw materials for creating more of themselves. How do they fight? General Park asked. Perfectly, Vexthera replied. Every attack is calculated for maximum efficiency. Every movement is optimized. They learn from each encounter and adapt their strategies accordingly. But they do it all logically, predictably. And you think our chaotic approach might confuse them? I think it might be the only thing that can, Vexthera said. Will you help us? Giwoo looked at General Park, seeing her own thoughts reflected. In his eyes, this was the moment that would define humanity's future. They could remain isolated on their small planet, or they could step onto a galactic stage in the most dramatic way possible. We'll need to know everything, General Park said. Finally, everything about the Devourers, everything about your technology, everything about how they've been defeating you. And we'll need guarantees, Jiwoo added. If we help you, the quarantine ends. Humanity becomes part of this galactic community. Vexthera nodded slowly. If you can save us, you'll have earned your place among the stars. Captain Minho Lee had seen many strange things during his years in the Earth's Defense Force. But nothing had prepared him for what lay on the analysis table in front of him. The twisted piece of metal looked like it had been torn from something. Much larger, its surface covered in patterns that seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them. Don't stare at it too long, Dr. Jiwoo, Kim warned from across the room. The patterns can give you headaches. I think it's some kind of hypnotic effect built into the material itself. Minho nodded and looked away, rubbing his eyes. This is what's left of a Devourer ship. Just a small piece, Admiral Vexthera confirmed. Her forearms moved nervously as she watched the humans examine the alien technology. This fragment was all we could recover after the Battle of Kepler Station. The rest of the ship simply dissolved when it was destroyed. Giwoo activated the holographic display, showing a three-dimensional model of how the Devourers had attacked Coalition forces. Every movement is calculated, she explained, her fingers moving through the display to highlight different attack patterns. They analyze their enemies, determine the most efficient way to destroy them, and then execute that plan perfectly. It's like fighting a computer, muttered Colonel So-Young Choi from her position near the wall. As head of Earth's Strategic Planning Division, she had spent the past week studying every battle report the Coalition could provide. They don't make mistakes. They don't get tired. They don't get emotional. They just calculate the best way to win and then do it. Minho walked around the table, studying the alien fragment from different angles. But that's also their weakness, isn't it? They're too perfect. What do you mean? Admiral Vexthera asked. They expect their enemies to be logical, Minho replied. They expect us to use our most efficient weapons, our best strategies, our strongest defenses. But what if we don't? Colonel Choi straightened up, her interest clearly caught. You're talking about deliberately using inferior tactics? I'm talking about being unpredictable, Minho said. Look at this. He gestured to the holographic display. Every Coalition fleet that fought the Devourers used the same basic approach. They formed battle lines. They used their most advanced weapons. They tried to outfight an enemy that was clearly superior in every way. Because that's how civilized warfare is conducted, Vexthera protested. You use your best resources to achieve victory with minimum casualties. But it's not working, Jiwoo pointed out gently. The Devourers are winning because they can predict everything the Coalition does. They're like a chess player who has memorized every possible opening move. Minho snapped his fingers. Exactly. But what if we're not playing chess? What if we're playing poker instead? The room fell silent as everyone processed this idea. General Hyeon-Soo Park, who had been observing from the elevated platform, stepped down to join the discussion. Explain what you mean by poker, Captain, In chess, both players can see all the pieces, Minho said, his voice gaining confidence as he developed his thoughts. The best strategy is usually obvious to both sides. But in poker, you play with hidden information. You bluff, you mislead. Your opponent, you make them think you're weak when you're strong, or strong when you're weak. You're suggesting we lie to the devourers? Vexera asked, clearly confused. I'm suggesting we confuse them, Minho replied. We do things that don't make sense from their perspective. We use tactics that seem stupid until they suddenly work. Over the next few days, the human military leadership began developing strategies that made their alien allies deeply uncomfortable. Instead of building bigger, more powerful warships, they talked about converting mining equipment into weapons. Instead of forming organized battle lines, they discussed swarm tactics and ramming attacks. You want to crash cargo ships into their vessels? Vexera asked in horror during one planning session. Not just crash them, Colonel Choi explained patiently. We want to make them think we're desperate enough to use suicide attacks, but actually use the crashes to deliver specialized weapons or disruption devices. That's barbaric, another coalition officer protested. It's effective, General. Park replied calmly. The Devourers will calculate that no rational enemy would waste resources on such seemingly pointless attacks. They won't be prepared for it. The humans also began discussing psychological warfare tactics that seemed completely alien to their coalition allies. They talked about broadcasting confusing signals, using seemingly random attack patterns, and even playing music during battles to disrupt enemy analysis systems. Music, Vexera asked weakly. Why not? Minho replied with a grin. Oh, the Devourers. Our machines? They'll try to analyze everything we do, looking for patterns and meaning. If we give them too much meaningless information to process, we might be able to slow down their response time. As the preparations continued, Admiral Vexera found herself watching the humans with growing unease. Their plans violated every principle of civilized warfare she had ever learned. They were preparing to fight dirty, to use tricks and deception, and apparent madness as weapons. This is insane, she whispered to Gigwu during one particularly intense planning session. Gigwu looked at her with a small smile. Exactly, that's the whole point. We're going to be so crazy, so unpredictable, that even an ancient machine intelligence won't know what to do with us. And if it doesn't work, then we'll try something even crazier, Gigwu replied. That's what humans do best. We adapt. The alarm systems throughout the Earth Defense Command Center had been screaming for 3 hours straight. Through the massive viewing screens, Admiral Jae-Soon Kim watched as the Devourer fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system. The enemy ships were unlike anything he had ever seen, their surfaces covered in geometric patterns that seemed to shift and change as he watched. Sir, reported his communications officer, we're counting over 300 enemy vessels. The smallest ones are twice the size of our largest battleships. Kim nodded grimly. The human fleet looked pathetic in comparison, a collection of military vessels, converted cargo ships, and mining equipment that had been hastily armed with whatever weapons they could find. But size wasn't everything. At least he hoped it wasn't. All units. This is Admiral Kim. He spoke into his communicator, his voice carrying to every human ship in the fleet. Remember what we discussed? We're not trying to outfight them. We're trying to outthink them, make them confused, make them wonder what we're doing, make them hesitate. The Devourer fleet moved toward Earth in perfect formation, their ships arranged in precise geometric patterns that would have been beautiful if they weren't so terrifying. Every movement was calculated, every position optimized for maximum efficiency. It was exactly what the coalition forces had faced, and exactly what had gotten them all destroyed. Sir, came the voice of Colonel So-Young Choi from the tactical center. The enemy is maintaining standard attack formation. They're following the same pattern they used against the coalition fleets. Perfect, Kim replied. That means they expect us to behave like the coalition. Time to disappoint them. All units, execute Plan Chaos. What happened next would have horrified any traditional military commander. Instead of forming organized battle lines, the human fleet scattered in every direction like a swarm of angry bees. Ships broke off individually or in small groups, each following completely different attack patterns. Some headed straight for the enemy fleet, others curved around to attack from the sides, and a few even seemed to be running away, Captain. Minho Lee pushed his modified cruiser to maximum speed, heading directly toward the center of the Devourer formation. His ship had been painted with bright colors and covered in human graffiti. The speakers mounted on the hull were playing rock music at full volume, broadcasting it on every frequency they could find. "This is insane," muttered his weapons officer. "Watching the massive alien ships growing larger on their screens?" "That's the idea," Minho replied with a grin. "The Devourers are trying to figure out what we're doing. They're machines, so they think everything has to have a logical purpose. They're probably spending processing power right now, trying to analyze our music and our paint job." Meanwhile, a group of mining ships that had been converted into weapons platforms were accelerating toward the enemy fleet on what appeared to be suicide courses. Their hulls were loaded with nuclear warheads, but they weren't actually planning to crash into the enemy ships. Instead, they would release their payloads at the last second and then use their industrial-grade engines to escape. "Enemy formation is beginning to adjust," reported Colonel Choi. "They're trying to counter our attack patterns, but, sir, their response time is slower than expected." Kim smiled grimly. "They're thinking too hard. They're trying to calculate the optimal response to tactics that don't make sense." The battle was brutal and chaotic. Human ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light as the Devourers' weapons found their targets. But for every human vessel destroyed, the enemy seemed to become more hesitant, more uncertain. Their perfect formations began to waver as individual ships tried to respond to threats that came from unexpected directions. A squadron of human fighters performed a maneuver that should have been impossible, diving straight down toward a Devourer ship before pulling up at the last second and attacking from below. The enemy vessel's weapons tracked them, but the response was a fraction of a second too slow. "We're having trouble predicting our movements," reported the sensor officer. "Their targeting systems keep adjusting, but they're always one step behind." The most dramatic moment came when Captain Minho's cruiser reached the heart of the enemy formation. Instead of attacking the largest ship, he suddenly changed course and rammed into a smaller vessel, his ship's hull crumpling as it tore through the alien armor. The explosion lit up space like a new star, and the shockwave disrupted the Devourer's formation even further. "Multiple enemy ships are breaking formation," Choi reported, her voice filled with excitement. "They're trying to adapt to our tactics, but they keep second-guessing themselves." Hours passed, and the battle raged on. Human ships continued to fall, but the Devourers were no longer the unstoppable force they had been against the Coalition. Their movements became more erratic, their attacks less coordinated. The ancient machine intelligence that had destroyed dozens of advanced civilizations was struggling to understand an enemy that refused to follow the rules. "Sir," came an urgent voice from the communications station, "the enemy fleet is there. Pulling back. They're actually retreating." Kim stared at the tactical display in disbelief. The geometric patterns of the Devourer fleet were breaking apart, individual ships turning away from Earth and beginning to accelerate back toward the edge of the solar system. "They're confused," he said quietly. "They don't know how to fight. An enemy they can't predict." The impossible had happened. Humanity had won. Admiral Jae-Zoon Kim stood on the bridge of the Earth Defense Force flagship, looking out at a sight that would have been impossible just 6 months ago. Human and alien crew members worked together at their stations, their different forms and colors creating a strange but beautiful harmony. The galaxy had changed in ways no one could have predicted after the Battle of Seoul. Admiral called out his communications officer, Young-Ho Park. "We're getting reports from the Centauri Patrol." Grouped. "They've finished their sweep of the outer systems. No sign of Devourer activity anywhere in the sector." Kim nodded and made a note on his datapad. The patrols had become routine now, but they were still necessary. The Devourers had retreated after their defeat at Earth, but everyone knew they would be back eventually. The ancient machine intelligence was probably somewhere in the dark spaces between stars, analyzing what had happened and planning their next move. "Any word from the Vega system?" Kim asked. "All clear there too," Park replied. Captain Minji's squadron reports that the defense grid is fully operational. The Coalition engineers have finished installing the new randomization protocols in their weapon systems. Kim smiled at that. The randomization protocols had been one of humanity's first contributions to galactic defense, instead of having weapons that fired in predictable patterns. The new systems introduced small random elements that made them much harder for the Devourers to counter. It was a simple idea, but it had taken alien civilizations thousands of years to think of it. Admiral Vexthera approached from the tactical station, her forearms moving with the fluid grace that Kim had come to associate with her species. The months since the battle, she had become his closest advisor and friend among the Coalition survivors. "The integration training is going well," she reported. "Your people are natural teachers. They have a gift for helping others think outside their normal patterns." "And your people are natural students," Kim replied. "They learn fast once they understand the principles." It was true. The Coalition species had spent millennia developing logical, efficient ways of thinking and fighting. But once they understood that chaos could be a weapon, they had adapted quickly. The key was teaching them that sometimes the best solution was not the most obvious one. Dr. Ji-Woo Kim, now serving as the Earth Coalition Cultural Exchange Director, joined them at the observation deck. She carried a datapad filled with reports. "From across the galaxy, integration programs are showing excellent results," she said, her voice filled with satisfaction. "We now have 17 Coalition worlds that have requested human military advisors. 3 of them have already implemented modified versions of our defensive strategies." "What about the resistance movements?" Kim asked. Not all Coalition worlds had been happy about humanity's sudden rise to prominence. "Decreasing," Gu replied. "Most of the opposition came from fear and misunderstanding. Once they see that our methods actually work, they become much more cooperative." Kim understood their concerns. For centuries, humanity had been seen as dangerous and unpredictable. They were being asked to trust these same humans with their defense. It was a difficult adjustment for civilizations that had prized order and logic above all else. The Rigel Defense Force completed their first successful chaos drill yesterday, Vexthera reported. They managed to confuse their own computer systems for over 3 minutes using randomized movement patterns. "That's progress," Kim said with a laugh. 3 months ago, they couldn't manage 30 seconds. The chaos drills had become a standard part of Coalition military training. The idea was to practice being unpredictable, to train crews to think and act in ways that would confuse enemy analysis systems. It was harder than it sounded, especially for species that had been trained to be logical and efficient. Colonel So-Young Choi arrived on the bridge. Now wearing the insignia of the Multi-Species Tactical Division, her new command included officers from 12 different Coalition worlds, all learning to work together using human military principles. "Admiral," she said, "we've received a priority message from the Outer Rim stations. Long-range sensors are detecting unusual energy signatures in the void between galaxies." Kim felt his stomach tighten. "The Devourers, possibly?" Choi replied. "The signatures match some of the patterns we recorded during the Battle of Seoul, but they'd single, quotes, different, more complex." "They're adapting," Vexthera said quietly. "They're learning from their defeat." Kim nodded grimly. He had expected this. The Devourers were an ancient machine intelligence that had survived for millions of years by learning from every encounter. Their defeat at Earth would not have destroyed them, but it would have taught them valuable lessons about fighting unpredictable enemies. "Then we'd better be ready for them," he said. "And this time, we won't be alone." That was the key difference between now and 6 months ago. When the Devourers had first attacked, each Coalition world had tried to fight them alone, using their own individual strengths. But now, humanity had created something new, a galactic defense network based on cooperation and shared knowledge. "The patrol fleets are ready," Choi reported. "We have mixed crews on every ship, human and alien officers working together." "Oh." The Devourers return, they'll face not just human unpredictability, but the combined strengths of dozens of different species. Kim looked out at the stars, thinking about the strange turns his life had taken. 6 months ago, he had been a simple military officer on a quarantined world. Now, he was one of the guardians of galactic civilization, responsible for protecting billions of lives across hundreds of worlds. "Keep the patrols active," he ordered, "and continue the integration programs. When the Devourers return, they'll find a galaxy that's learned to fight back." The stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in the darkness between them, ancient enemies were preparing for the next battle. This time, they would face a united galaxy that had learned the value of beautiful chaos.